I thought I knew my wife. I thought our marriage was real. But one unexpected night changed everything, and what I uncovered was worse than I ever imagined. I watched them glide across the dance floor, his hand firmly placed on her waist as they moved in perfect sync. Their steps were fluid, almost effortless, as if they had been dancing together for years. It was clear they made an excellent pair. The expression on my wife's face said it all. She was completely in her element, smiling as the music filled the room, while the onlookers clapped and cheered in appreciation of the couple's performance. Leaving my spot at the bar, I wandered over to the entrance of the large function hall, drawn by curiosity. From there, I had a clear view of Linda twirling alongside her dance partner. The weekly late-night practice sessions had never been my thing, but for her, they were a passion. When we first joined the club, she was thrilled to find out there was a dance section, and she had jumped at the chance to be a part of it. I took a slow sip of my drink as I watched Linda and her partner step off the floor, still holding hands, engaged in an animated discussion about their performance. A small, unwelcome pang of jealousy crept in as I noticed how their fingers remained intertwined while they chatted with another couple. I hadn't planned to meet her here tonight. I had finished work earlier than expected and decided to drop by, curious to see what these dance nights really looked like. I was supposed to clock out at midnight, but with a job wrapping up ahead of schedule, I found myself with 3 unexpected hours to spare. She hadn't noticed me yet, too wrapped up in her dancing to be looking for me. Then there was George. A few years older than both of us, George had already retired, now in his early 60s, nearly 2 decades our senior. He had the confidence of a man who had figured out the perfect way to surround himself with women, by being an exceptional dance partner. And by all accounts he was just that. Linda had mentioned him many times, often highlighting how the ladies in the club sought him out because of his skill. After hearing about his talent on repeat, I had learned to tune it out. Maybe that was part of the reason I showed up tonight, to see him for myself. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but here I was, watching, sizing him up. Linda and I had been married for 20 years, raising 2 teenagers, Rachel, who had just turned 18, and Ryan, now 16. Both were growing into independent young adults, busy with their own lives, spending more time out of the house than in it. With the kids forging their own paths, Linda and I had found ourselves alone in the family home more often than ever. Maybe that was why she had thrown herself into dancing. Maybe that was why I was here. A few years back, Linda and I had agreed that we needed to expand our social circle, so we joined the local community club. It offered a variety of activities, dance nights, day trips, social gatherings, and all sorts of fun events. Over time, we found our own rhythm, getting involved both as a couple and separately in different activities. The one rule we had set from the start was that our individual interests wouldn't interfere with our time together. That arrangement worked well, at least it did in the beginning. But lately things had shifted. Linda's passion for dancing had grown into something more than just a casual hobby. It wasn't just another activity anymore, it had become her priority. Since I had 2 left feet and no real interest in dancing, it was something she did on her own. At first I didn't mind. She enjoyed it and I wanted her to have something for herself. But over time I couldn't ignore the changes. What started as a dance night once every 2 weeks had gradually turned into a weekly routine, with extra practice sessions sneaking in here and there. It had been so gradual that I hadn't fully registered it at first, but now as I sat in my car, my mind replayed the way she had looked at George tonight. The way they held hands. The ease with which he wrapped an arm around her waist, so open, so comfortable. I wanted to shake off the creeping suspicion, but it had already taken root. I had no real proof, just a gut feeling that something wasn't right. And gut feelings had a way of being right more often than not. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, heading home. If she had gotten a ride back, she should already be there waiting for me. The thought sat heavy in my chest as I pulled into the driveway. I stepped inside, quickly changed out of my work clothes, and moved quietly through the house. Something didn't feel right. Instinctively, I slipped out the back door, locking it behind me, and made my way into the garage. It was 11:38 p.m. My mind raced. Should I get in my car and leave? Or should I stay hidden? Her car was already parked outside, so she wouldn't need to come in here. If I waited, I might get answers without tipping her off. I disabled the garage door opener, just in case. The last thing I needed was to be caught hiding. Sitting in the dark, the silence felt almost unbearable. Every minute stretched on endlessly. At exactly 11:58 p.m., I heard movement. The sound of footsteps. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. And then, when I finally saw her, she looked at me carefully, as if trying to gauge my reaction. "Have you just had a shower, love?" she asked, her voice casual but cautious. I looked at her, wrapped in a towel, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders. "Did you just take a shower?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if realizing the position she was in. "Yes, a little while ago," she replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I haven't changed into my night clothes yet. I decided to wash my hair too. I know it's late, but I was feeling a bit clammy, and you know how much I hate that." I watched as a faint flush crept onto her cheeks before she turned away, fussing with her hair. I bit my lip. She was lying. The clock read 12:39 a.m., and I couldn't shake the nagging thought. Where had she really been since 9:30 p.m.? And how convenient was it that she arrived home just before my usual finishing time? A coincidence? Maybe. Innocent? Doubtful. Something wasn't right, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. As I lay in bed later that night, staring at the ceiling, I listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing. My mind raced. Whatever was happening, I needed to find out the truth, who she was with, where she was going, and just how deep this ran before I made a move. Once I confronted her, there would be no turning back. I woke early the next morning to the scent of fresh coffee drifting through the house. Helen was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup in her hands, flipping through the club's event brochure. "There's a chance to dance at the ballroom this weekend," she mentioned, adjusting her glasses as she glanced over at me. "Spots are limited. I won't put my name down if you don't want me to go." I held her gaze for a moment, considering my options. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. We had spent weekends apart before, both of us enjoying our own hobbies. But this time was different. This time I had a reason to be wary. I forced a neutral expression, playing my best poker face. "Sounds like it'll be a great experience for you," I said, keeping my voice even. "I know how much you love dancing." She smiled faintly, as if relieved by my response, and I nodded as if everything was fine. But inside, my mind was already working. If she was planning something, this trip would be the perfect opportunity to find out. Later that day, I met up with my best friend, Alfie. He took one look at me and frowned. "All right, mate, spill it. You look like hell." I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "I don't even know where to start." "Then just start anywhere," he said, gripping my shoulder. "We'll deal with it. You haven't said anything to her yet, have you?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No. I need to be sure before I do." Alfie nodded, his expression hardening. "All right. I'll ask around, see if anyone knows anything about these guys from the club. Patty might be able to get some info from the women, see if anything turns up." I met his eyes, grateful but still feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. "I appreciate that, man." "Don't worry," he said firmly. "We'll figure this out. Whatever happens, you're not dealing with it alone." I needed help. More than that, I needed someone in my corner, someone who would have my back while I tried to make sense of this mess. "For now, I think I'll steer clear of the club," I told Alfie, swirling the coffee in my cup. "I don't want to risk running into any of them. Better to keep my distance." "Yeah, probably a good call," he agreed. We sat for another hour, tossing around ideas, not just about what I should do next, but also, admittedly, some over-the-top revenge fantasies. Some were absurd, the kind of things you'd see in a bad movie, but honestly, just voicing them helped. It made me feel like I had some control over this situation, even if only in theory. Later that evening, I heard the familiar sound of Helen's heels clicking against the brick pathway as she approached the front door. I glanced toward the lounge entrance just as she stepped inside. Our eyes met. For the briefest moment, I caught something in her expression. Nervousness, maybe even fear. She turned away quickly, dropping her handbag beside the sofa before heading into the kitchen. I forced a smile, the best welcome home look I could muster, and offered to pour her a cup of coffee. She nodded, looking grateful. We carried on as usual, going through the motions of everyday life. But beneath the surface, everything was different. I found myself instinctively pulling away from her. Any physical contact between us had all but disappeared, and surprisingly, Helen didn't push the issue. A couple of times she gave me an odd look as if sensing the shift, but she didn't say anything. By Wednesday she had packed for the upcoming trip. She was practically buzzing with excitement, carefully selecting her dance outfits and making sure everything was ready. I didn't say much, just watched, taking note of every little detail. That Friday I left work early. Helen was supposed to leave by 4 p.m., meeting up with Brian and his wife, who were driving up to the ballroom event. She was taking her car to their place first and then riding along with the others. She never specified exactly who the others were, but I already knew. The drive to Blackpool would take around 2 hours, easier than taking the train, she had pointed out. More convenient in case she wanted to come home early or, as she put it, go out exploring. I clenched my jaw. She had no idea what she had done to me. The betrayal, the lies, the secrecy, it all boiled over inside me in that moment. With a sudden surge of anger, I grabbed the nearest glass from the table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wedding photo we had kept on the mantel for years, the shards raining down onto the floor like the broken remains of our marriage. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the destruction, breathing heavily. Then, without a second thought, I turned on my heel, grabbed my keys and strode out the door. By the time I pulled into Helen's parents' driveway, it was nearly 7:30 p.m. When I arrived at Helen's parents' house, they greeted me warmly as they always did. But the moment they realized she wasn't with me, their smiles faded slightly. "Where's Helen?" her mother asked. "She's gone to Blackpool for the weekend," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "A few people from the club invited her to go dancing at the ballroom there." They nodded, accepting the explanation, but something about the way her father studied me made me wonder if he sensed something was off. I didn't linger long, making an excuse about needing to be up early and heading out soon after. I had other plans for the night. By the time I met up with Alfie and the guys, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. We had picked our usual fishing spot, a quiet lakeside area that was secluded enough for us to talk freely. We went through the usual routine, setting up rods, unpacking gear, and making the campsite look as normal as possible. But this wasn't about fishing. At 7 p.m., Gas pulled in behind us, stumbling out of his truck with a grin. We went way back, all the way to primary school, and he was the kind of guy who never asked too many questions, just showed up when you needed him. "All right," Alfie muttered, cracking his knuckles. "Let's do this." First up was Brian's car. In seconds, all 4 valve stems were sliced clean off, leaving his tires useless. A crowbar popped open the fuel cap, and a lovely mixture of sand and sugar found its way into the tank. We were efficient. No wasted movements, no hesitation. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. Then onto George's car. Same treatment. 4 slashed valve stems. Fuel tank thoroughly contaminated. But we didn't stop there. Alfie took the liberty of adding some decorative scratches to the paint job, just for good measure. By the time we stepped back to admire our handiwork, we were barely holding in our laughter. "Think that'll slow them down?" Gesh chuckled. "Oh, I'd say they'll be going nowhere fast," I smirked. Just as we were settling back into our chairs, my phone beeped with a message. A minute later it rang. Then again. Alfie and I exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. For the next 10 minutes, the calls and texts kept coming, one after another. Then silence. "I bet they're trying to figure out what the hell's going on," Alfie said, wiping a tear from his eye. "They're probably thinking it's just a tire problem," I said, catching my breath. "It'll take a while before they realize their engines are screwed too." Gaz and Patty watched us, shaking their heads in amusement. They didn't know the full story, but they didn't need to. The sheer joy on our faces was enough to keep them entertained. About half an hour later, the call started again. More missed messages. More ignored calls. More laughter. "All right," Alfie finally said, catching his breath. "What's next?" I checked the GPS tracker I had placed on Helen's car. My stomach clenched as I saw her location pop up. "She's back at George's place," I muttered. I hadn't expected that. I had miscalculated. For a moment, the satisfaction of the evening wore off. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what this meant. Was she staying there for the night? Had this been the plan all along? Alfie must have seen the shift in my expression because his tone turned serious. "All right, mate. What now?" I exhaled slowly, trying to think straight. "I'll stay here tonight. Figure out what I want to do tomorrow. I've got work to think about too." "Good call," Alfie nodded. "If you go storming in now, she'll know you're on to her." I clenched my jaw but nodded. He was right. At 11:30 p.m., the calls finally stopped. I put my phone down and stared at the lake, my mind far from the stillness of the water in front of me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had assumed she would be at her parents' house by now, but clearly that wasn't the case. She hadn't even called them yet. That told me everything I needed to know. She was trying to keep things quiet. Well, let's see how long she can keep that up. As I scrolled through my phone, the pit in my stomach deepened. The images in front of me painted a story I never wanted to see. The dance club, the late nights, the way they moved together. Too comfortable, too intimate. Then the picture shifted. A change of partners. Hugging. Kissing. Laughing. This group wasn't just close. They were very comfortable with each other. And then the photos moved from the dance floor to inside a room. My stomach twisted as I clicked through them, each image chipping away at the life I thought I had. The woman in these pictures, my wife, wasn't just dancing. The evidence of betrayal was laid out right in front of me, frame by frame. Behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I turned to see Patty standing in the doorway, her hand clamped over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had followed Alfie into the small room and now she was staring at the screen, horrified. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with the kind of pain that only comes from realizing something you can't unsee. I swallowed hard. Helen, on the other hand, still hadn't mentioned a word about what had been done to her car. Or George's for that matter. That alone confirmed my suspicions. She was trying to keep the chaos at bay, playing it cool until she figured out exactly what was happening. But now she knew. Something was going on. And so did George. I wondered if they had put the pieces together yet. Had they already talked? Were they scrambling to cover their tracks, trying to figure out their next move? Or worse, were they making plans to move on together? The thought made my chest tighten, but at the same time, it only stoked the fire of my anger. I had been patient. I had watched. Waited. But now it was my turn to play the game. I leaned back, tapping my fingers against the table, an idea forming in my mind. It was time to set the wheels in motion. I'd stick to my fishing story. Tell Helen all about how peaceful it was, how relaxing the weekend had been. I'd laugh about catching nothing, make a joke about the weather, keep everything light and casual. And then, I'd sit back and watch her unravel. She would start receiving messages from her friends at work soon enough. That's when the fun would begin. I chuckled to myself, imagining the moment realization dawned on her. This wasn't a game to me. It was my life. My marriage. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I checked the tracker on my phone. Helen had already left Alfie's and was heading straight back to George's place. She just can't stay away from him, can she? My jaw clenched. I wouldn't have to wait long now. As I sat there, the weight of everything started to sink in. Our marriage, our life together, had been unraveling for longer than I had realized. The signs were all there, I just hadn't seen them for what they were. We had been comfortable, yes. But had we been happy? Our sex life had taken a hit now that I thought about it. It had been months since things felt truly intimate between us. Maybe I hadn't noticed how far apart we had drifted. I had my hobbies. Fishing had once been an obsession, but now it was more of a social escape. Helen had her dancing, her fitness classes, and the occasional bridge night. I should have seen it coming. It wasn't just the dancing. It was the distance. And now I was staring at messages that suggested something even worse, something I hadn't even considered until this moment. Rumors. Talk of Helen being involved in a swinger group. The words felt surreal as I read them, my mind struggling to process what they meant. Was it true? Had she been living a double life right under my nose? Or was this just another piece of the puzzle I had been too blind to see? I made my stance clear. I wasn't going to tolerate this, not now, not ever. As far as I was concerned, we were done. I didn't bother listening to any more of Helen's messages. Instead, I opened my email. A flood of responses had come in, reactions to the messages I had sent earlier. Most were filled with shock and disbelief, people struggling to process what had happened. I didn't even read through them properly, I just forwarded every single one to Helen's email. Let her deal with it. I let out a bitter chuckle at the thought. While I was drowning in this mess, she and George were probably tangled up in each other, completely oblivious to the wreckage they had left behind. As I sank into my recliner trying to get comfortable, my phone rang. I didn't even check the caller ID, I already knew who it was. I answered. Yes. There was a pause, then a voice filled with barely contained rage. What the hell have you done, Cole? Helen spat. I'm getting calls from everyone, my colleagues, my friends, they're all bombarding me with messages about some photos and a video. Apparently they show something involving me and George. Why the hell didn't you talk to me first? I let out a slow breath, my grip tightening around the phone. Talk to you? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Yeah, Helen, let's talk. Maybe you can explain what George meant when he said he was going to be screwing you from now on. Maybe you can thank him for that little announcement, since I've already forwarded it to my solicitor. Silence. You hurt me, Helen. You broke me. So screw off. Go do whatever it is you and George do best. I don't care anymore. I don't want to speak to you. I just want to know why. There was a long pause before I continued. When you're ready to tell me, call me. But don't waste my time. I'm done with you. The clock is ticking. I ended the call before she could respond. My head was pounding, my body buzzing with anger. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples, trying to steady my breathing. Then my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Helen. I hesitated, then picked up. Oh dear me, a voice sneered on the other end. Listen up, punk. Helen's with me now, so stop being a prick and get used to it. We're going to be drilling day and night just the way she likes it. And when I can't do her, one of my friends will step in. She's already met Brian, as you know. In fact, I've got some visitors coming over tonight. Don't worry, we'll make sure she's well taken care of. Night-night, cucky. I clenched my jaw, my whole body stiffening. This wasn't just about humiliating me anymore. George was pushing this further, trying to taunt me to make sure I knew exactly how little he thought of me. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. Enough was enough. I picked up my keys and called Alfie. We've got a situation. Within 20 minutes, we were both in my car, parked down the street from George's house. Alfie glanced at me. Did you bring the gear? I nodded. Of course. Whatever happened next, I wasn't walking away empty-handed. What had I done? Was I stupid? Everything was right there in front of me, the proof, the betrayal, the reality I had refused to fully accept until now. Alfie and I scrambled into the back of his truck, moving quickly. We changed into boiler suits, pulling balaclavas over our faces, then slipped on gloves. Bad gloves underneath for knuckle protection and latex gloves on top to keep things clean. The boots were sturdy, ready for whatever came next. Inside, chaos had erupted. Don't hurt me, please, a voice pleaded, shaking with fear. We turned toward the sound, our minds racing. Helen was on the floor. The guy, George or one of his scumbag friends, had collapsed on top of her in the chaos, knocking her unconscious. She lay there, her body sprawled out, her dress disheveled. Dark, fresh bite marks covered her chest and neck, evidence of what had been happening before we got here. I swallowed hard, my emotions warring inside me. I hated her for what she had done. But at the same time, I loved her. Was I an idiot? Was I confused? Probably. I exhaled sharply and looked around, trying to piece together the situation. We had gathered enough information to confirm that the woman, Joyce, was someone's wife, but she wasn't here. Maybe she hadn't been for a while. That realization hit me harder than I expected. A sharp ache bloomed in my chest and suddenly I felt like I couldn't breathe. The weight of it all came crashing down. The loss of my friend. The loss of my lover. My marriage. My future. Everything I had built, everything, was crumbling in front of me. My vision blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I couldn't hold it in any longer. A broken sob escaped my throat, followed by another. And then another. I didn't care who was watching. I let the grief take over, my body shaking as I mourned the life I thought I had. Minutes passed. Maybe more. The sharp, relentless ringing of my phone cut through my misery, pulling me back to the present. I wiped at my face, my breath still uneven. Alfie sat across from me, sipping his coffee, watching me carefully. Well, at least it's over, he muttered. No cops. No drama. Maybe things will stay that way. Let's hope so, I sighed, running a hand down my face. Alfie raised his mug in a small salute. Yeah. Thanks for everything, mate. You too, Patty. I love the pair of you. Patty scoffed, rolling her eyes. Yeah, enough of that sentimental garbage. We need to figure out what's next. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Well, I said, glancing out the window. I still haven't seen Helen's car pull into the driveway yet. We all exchanged a look. That needed to be sorted. Immediately. I wasn't sure what to do with Helen's car. Should I have it towed to her parents' house? Or just leave it where it was? I wasn't even sure how I felt about her anymore. I sat in my home office, staring at my phone for a long moment before finally dialing her parents' number. It only rang twice before her father picked up. Hello? How are things this morning? He asked, his tone steady but cautious. I exhaled slowly. Helen still asleep? Yeah, probably for the best, he said. We'll get her cleaned up when she wakes and see what her version of events is. There was a pause before he added, I'm sorry, son. And, thank you for what you did last night. I just hope you don't get into any trouble over it. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. I don't think that'll be an issue. The guys know I mean business now. The fact that I broke up their little party sent shockwaves through the air. Alfie and Patty glanced at me as I spoke, waiting to hear what was next. Then my phone buzzed again. Helen. I hesitated but picked up. Her voice was soft at first. Rick. I don't even know what to say. I scoffed, leaning back in my chair. How about starting with the truth? She inhaled sharply, then let out a shaky breath. I never wanted to hurt you. I clenched my jaw. First off, you have a strange way of showing love. Is screwing other guys part of that now? Because I sure as hell don't get it. Rick, it wasn't like that. I cut her off. And as for not wanting to hurt me? That only works if you don't get caught, or better yet if you don't do it in the first place. But you screwed that up too, didn't you? Silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, scrambling to find an excuse that would make this sound better than it was. Finally she spoke again, her tone shifting. My dad said I should thank you for getting me out of there last night, but honestly there was no need. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I knew what was going on. I agreed to it. My grip tightened around my phone. You agreed to it? Yeah. I mean, I was out of it, but after everything that had already happened, we figured things couldn't get any worse. We were just having fun. A bitter laugh escaped me. You really are stupid, aren't you? She didn't say anything. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she spoke again, this time more carefully. I wanted to do this face to face. At least try to explain. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temple. Yeah. I said coldly. Then do it. Because I'm still waiting for a single thing that makes any of this okay. I could go ahead and divorce her right now, no question. But I knew there would be fallout. People would ask questions. I needed to be ready for that. Alfie, I said, my voice low, controlled. Did you happen to grab any of the memory cards from the cameras the other night? His expression shifted the moment he met my eyes. He saw it, the wildness, the simmering rage barely held in check. For the first time he actually looked worried about me. You know I did, Rick, he admitted, his voice cautious. They're in the desk drawer right in front of you. I pulled the drawer open, my fingers brushing against the small stack of memory cards. Evidence. Proof of what I already knew but still couldn't fully wrap my head around. There was no getting Helen back. And even if there was, I couldn't take her back. She had thrown away everything we built, our life, our marriage, our family, for what? Some seedy, meaningless nights in a Blackpool hotel? With men who didn't care about her the way I had? No. There was no way back from this. The phone call with Ryan had confirmed that. He had tried to defend his mother, tried to make sense of it all. But even he had started to see the truth. He was fighting a losing battle, and deep down I think he knew it. Still hearing his voice, "Are you sure, Dad?" kept echoing in my mind. I stared out across the patio, watching the last light of the day fade into darkness. "Damn right I'm sure," I muttered, downing the last of my drink. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the ache in my chest. Helen's voice rang in my head, unrelenting. "Rick, please. Answer me. Talk to me. If you love me at all, please, just talk to me." I wiped a hand across my face, my eyes stinging. My heart was breaking, but I knew, this was the endgame. I had given her everything. I had been faithful. I had honored my vows. And she had chosen to throw me away. For that. For them. For some cheap, meaningless thrill. No. There was no way back. It was time to let go.